Hi everyone, we might make a start then. Thank you for joining us today as we cover off some fundamentals of basic geometric road design. Warm welcome to all of you who have tuned in this afternoon. My name is Angela Juhas and I will be moderating today's session with the assistance of my colleague Kathy DeCouris, whose photo isn't there I'm afraid, but she'll be here giving me some assistance today because we have a very large group, which is wonderful. Now, in terms of some housekeeping items, we are recording today's session and a copy of the recording together with the presentation material will be shared with all of our wonderful listeners once the session has concluded. So please do keep an eye on your emails for that. Now, webinars work best when they're interactive, and so please don't be shy, get involved. Type in your questions into the questions box at any stage of the presentation. Now, in saying that, as I mentioned before, we do have our highest ever attendance numbers at an ARB webinar, which is fantastic, but if we don't get around to addressing your question during the presentation, please don't hesitate to contact us at any stage. There'll be some contact details up on the last slide once we're done. Now, before I hand over to our presenter, I would like you to join me in giving him a big virtual round of applause. Please give it up for David Milling of ARB. Now, David joined ARB in 2008 and has a strong background in road construction and design. He is a nationally registered senior road safety auditor with IPUIA and specialises in road safety auditing, road safety in design, crash investigations, motorcycle safety and network safety analysis. So basically there's not much he doesn't do. A special thanks also to Noel O'Callaghan, who assisted in putting together this presentation. Noel recently joined ARB in our Adelaide office, and many of you might know his name from his extensive work on various Austroads projects relating to road design. So thank you, Noel, for your contribution too. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to David to give us some insight into basic geometric road design principles. Welcome, David. Tell us a little bit more about what we'll be covering today.
Hello there, Angela. Thanks for the introduction. Okay. So before we get into the details of what we'll be focusing on today, I just wanted to point out that we'll be referencing the Off-Road Guide to Road Design Part 3, Geometric Road Design, and we are also drawing on some information provided by the International Road Assessment Program, or as most people would know it, IRAP. The focus of the presentation today is identifying the elements of geometric road design, making design decisions, considering all road users, considering whole-of-life costs such as safety, asset management and maintenance, being inclusive of all road engineering disciplines, and problem-solving some common geometric design issues. So the first cab off the rank is the fundamental design considerations, and these are drawn from the Guide to Road Design Part 3, Chapter 2. So before we go into the fundamentals, I'd just like to highlight the road designer's role. So a road designer's role is to develop the most appropriate design that is functional, that it considers whole-of-life costs, and takes into consideration inputs from all road engineering disciplines. A road design is unlikely to be achieved quickly. Many alternate designs may be produced and evaluated. The design should be reviewed and certified by the appropriate person. For example, in Queensland, that's an RPEQ with experience in road design. Of course, it's no use to a road designer to have an RPEQ who specialises in structures to sign off on a road design. So to get some input from all the participants, what road engineering disciplines would you consult with during the design process? Angela, if you just want to just indicate where these guys should enter in their feedback, and then they'll know where they're directing their questions for the rest of the webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. Alrighty. Well, in your questions box is where we'd like you to type your answer for this one. So if you wouldn't mind popping in there your answer to this question, I'll be able to receive those and read them out to David. I guess from my perspective, David, it would seem as though it would be a very collaborative process. So you'd be incorporating, a whole range of different engineering disciplines. Would you say that's pretty fair to say?
That's definitely the case, Angela. Yeah, you want to draw on all the experiences from all the road engineering disciplines. The designer is a specialist in the design area, whereas someone who's in asset management or pavement design are a specialist in that field. Today we're focusing on highlighting the different road engineering disciplines which are required, but there's also other disciplines within the road engineering field that we need to consider as well. So those might be environmental engineers, environmental scientists, stakeholders from the community, and also to cultural heritage experts in Indigenous and Australian culture.
All right. Well, the responses are flooding through, so thank you everyone for getting involved. I'll reel off a couple to you, David. We've got civil designers, geotechnical engineers, we've got asset management planners, pavement engineers, and the road safety engineers is also a popular choice, which I think you'll be very happy to hear, David.
Well, I can't blame people for thinking that, Angela. We are specialists in our field. So yeah, they're all really great answers, and everyone's right. So with the safety engineers, as a designer, you need to be aware of the crash risk. You need to be able to have mechanisms to mitigate crash risk through the design and control these at the road design stage. Controlling these at the road design stage has huge safety benefits, and there's a lot of cost savings to be gained. Of course, yeah, traffic management, operational engineers. The road design needs to consider adjoining sections of road. If you build a road that is slightly different or may result in different operational levels, you may restrict the network. Being aware of the regular and most costly asset management and maintenance activities on a road will allow you to try and prevent these from occurring or reoccurring in a design. These may include such things as edge brakes, sign replacement, pothole repairs, or a short skid resistance life. This will identify changes that you can make in your design with sources of materials or aggregate or even construction processes. Conversations with the pavement engineers about pavement design life may identify alternate designs that may have cost savings over the life of the road. It may also be beneficial to analyse the life of pavements on adjoining sections of road, what the intended life of the pavement was, what the resulting life of the pavement was, and what the maintenance costs were. It may be beneficial to spend 10-20% more on your pavement to reduce the whole of life costs. And also to discussing your design with the construction expert. So your design may result in high construction costs. The construction guys may have alternate construction methods, which may influence the design, but they might work hand in hand. So if you can change a few elements within the design, it may lead to ease of construction and cost savings during the construction phase. So yeah, all really good answers, and I think everyone's on the ball. So when looking at the key road design requirements, you can see how the input of many road engineering disciplines can help achieve the best outcome. All of those things there up on the screen are all contributed to by the various road engineering disciplines. So when we're doing the design, particularly greenfield design, we consider the location of the road, the function of the road, and the expected traffic that we'll have on the road. We'll also consider the terrain. The terrain will affect the alignment, the earthworks, and the resulting costs. Some things that may control our design are existing road networks. We have to fit into the surrounding road network. There may be cultural heritage issues which may restrict an alignment. We also do have to expect that these may pop up during the design process. And then there's also two existing utilities. These may need to be relocated, or perhaps they're too costly to relocate, and that'll stipulate how we end up with our resulting road design. The geology of the road or the road alignment that we want to look at. So you may have such restricting things as the water table, unsuitable soils, and also too, we have to consider the cut and fill balance. And then the other thing to consider is the environment. So we need to consider the wildlife, vegetation, the resulting pollution from introducing the road alignment, and then also to the road traffic noise and the vibrations, and whether we need to put in place mitigation measures for that and allow for that in the design. So when we consider the whole of life costs, we need to try and find the balance. So we consider the safety risk of the design. We need to be aware of the crash types that may occur with various elements within the design. We also need to be aware of how the road will be maintained. What are the maintenance costs going to be? If we can provide a wide shoulder with a recoverable slope, then maintenance crews are able to do their mowing and whatnot. If we provide V-drains, it's much more costly to maintain. And then also too, as I mentioned before, the pavement life. If we can have in-depth conversations with the pavement engineers and design a pavement that may be more costly, but we can demonstrate that there's cost savings over the life of the pavement, then we can reduce on relaying pavement, maintenance costs, and also to a cost that may not be immediately considered is the cost of traffic management when we're replacing pavement, particularly in urban areas. When we consider safety, we need to recognise that humans as road users make mistakes. And in the design, we should accommodate for these. A road design should reduce the likelihood of a crash occurring, and in the event that a crash does occur, provide a forgiving road size to reduce the severity of that crash. So some of the road users that we consider during the design process are pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, and of course heavy vehicles. I would ask if the participants can perhaps flag any other road users that we should consider, Angela.
Absolutely. So once again, ladies and gents, if you could type your thoughts on this question into the questions box. We're looking at other road users. So we already have a few responses. Thank you, Yannicka. Sorry, I hope I haven't mispronounced your name. Animals, pedestrians, public transport, specifically buses, says Anthony. Trams, cars, thank you, Matthew. Animals, again, get a mention, which is lovely. Thank you, Corby. Cyclists, equestrian, now that's a good response. Jin, thank you very much for that. The elderly and children, of course. And quite a few more there in relation to our furry animal friends and cyclists and so forth. So great answers. What do you think of that, David?
Yeah, definitely everyone's on the same page with that. Yeah, one thing is emergency services.
We've got another David here has mentioned politicians. I thought that was very funny. So.
Oh, right. Well, that'd be a traffic management issue then, wouldn't it? Yeah. No, look, everyone is on the ball. I'm really happy to see that everyone who's potentially already in road design or looking to move into road design, or perhaps even managing road design projects, is already considering all of the road users. So it's definitely school-aged children, pedestrians, cyclists, there's the elderly, including elderly on mobility scooters. Some jurisdictions allow segways, and then heavy vehicles and public transport, and then of course that includes train
David, you
crossings.
still there?
Yeah, yep. Have you got me?
Whoops, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry, you dropped out at my end, but that's all right. We're all good. We're back.
Well, in the event that I dropped out for everyone else, everyone's on the same page, and it's really good to see that all of us contributing to road design as an industry are all considering the same road users. So we go from road users to design vehicles. So when considering the selection of a design vehicle, also keep in mind the road users. By default, often an 18-metre semi-trailer is chosen as a design vehicle. This is perhaps ideal for swept path manoeuvres and assessing storage capacity. However, it does not take into consideration the other road users. The surrounding environment should be considered. Are there schools or retirement villages nearby? Is the route used by motorcyclists or cyclists on weekends? So if you have a road user that's on a vehicle, perhaps they need to also be considered in the design, more so than just picking a design vehicle to do swept paths and storage and assessing capacity. An example is if you're designing for a low volume road that by definition does not require wide lanes, what will the safety benefits over the life of the road be if you do provide wide lanes on curbs, for an example? Okay, and we'll touch on that later on in the webinar. So the common design elements, or the predominant design elements to consider are the speed parameters, cross-section, sight distance, horizontal and vertical alignment, auxiliary lanes, drainage, and then putting all these together, making design decisions to determine what level that these are provided at and whether they're provided in different ways and formats. So speed is the principal safety parameter to coordinate the design of stopping distance, sight distance, curve radius, super elevation, and lane width. The operating speed and desired speed should also be considered during the design process. The desired speed in the design process can be used to a certain extent to control the resulting operating speed of road users. So that's also another way to manage your safety and your crash risk. So the next one is cross-sections. This is an example of a rural cross-section. Shows all the elements there, going from left to right. You've got your verge there. Probably not the best example with the wire rope and the curb, but the verge there does also provide width there to put in safety barriers. But if the safety barrier is not there, it also provides a rounded shoulder for a vehicle that's perhaps left the edge of the formation to recover and come back. You've got your curb there to keep your water away from the edge of the road. The shoulder, lane, median in the centre, and then over to the right is the batter. So the cross-section in an urban environment is quite different. You may have service roads, divided carriageways. You'll often have utility services under the nature strip or in the centre median. You also do have to consider cyclists due to the traffic volumes. Considering wider shoulders for breakdowns is also important. You need to consider having safe widths and perhaps stopping bays for enforcement, for police, and then also to consideration to maintenance. So stopping sight distance is the distance to safely react and stop to avoid hitting an object on the road or perhaps another vehicle that's crossed into your lane. The distance is affected by the operating speed, coefficient of deceleration, which is, of course, governed by the vehicle type and the surface condition, and whether that surface is dry or wet. Also, the grade, so is the vehicle travelling up or down a hill, will influence the total stopping distance. So when we have a look at horizontal sight distance, the horizontal sight distance is the distance from the vehicle to an object or a vehicle that you need to stop before you hit. The greater the sight distance, the greater opportunity you have to stop within that set stopping sight distance and avoid a collision. In this example, we can see that we've got a left-hand curve. The inside of the curve, there's no restrictive features in there to restrict the sight line. The vehicle within the purple rectangle here has a clear sight to the object or surface deficiency. It has enough time to safely reduce the speed, stop, or go around it within the stopping sight distance. On the right-hand side, we have the same curve. However, there's restrictive features within the sight line. The sight line is restricted, therefore the stopping sight distance is restricted. The vehicle will have to brake at a faster rate and increases the risk of a vehicle perhaps going into the other lane, losing control, or not stopping before the object or surface deficiency. These diagrams are showing the riding path for a motorcycle. In the curve on the left, you can see the green dotted line. That indicates that the object's been identified early. There's a safe rate of deceleration. The motorcyclist is able to, in a controlled manner, go around the object and continue on the riding path. On the curve on the right-hand side, the red dotted line represents that the object has been identified very late. Heavy braking and manoeuvring has to be undertaken to go around the object. Significantly increases the risk of the motorcycle going into the opposing lane or losing control and sliding out. So once again, we have to consider for all the road users. So the vertical sight distance is the distance from the driver eye height to a stationary object or another vehicle over the crest. Just an example there of that. It's much the same as how you would calculate it for a horizontal sight distance. So when we have a look at overtaking sight distance, there's two things to consider. There's the establishment sight distance and the continuation sight distance. The distances vary dependent on the road section operating speed and also to the vehicle type. Okay. So the overtaking establishment sight distance is the distance required to start overtaking. Within this overtaking, continuation sight distance is required to complete the manoeuvre or abandon the manoeuvre. So that's that one down at the bottom of the screen. When an overtaking lane is present, overtaking establishment sight distance is not required at the end of the overtaking lane as the overtaking vehicle has not crossed into the opposing lane. So in layman's terms, if you're not in the other lane looking for vehicles to come in the opposite direction, you need less distance to complete the manoeuvre because you're not trying to avoid the vehicle coming in the opposite direction. Okay, so we've got a poll question for you to select the answer from here.
Absolutely.
So what is?
Sorry,
Yep.
David, to cut you off. I was just going to let people know when I launch the poll that they'll get a little pop-up blue box on their screen, and then you'll just require to click your answer choice there. So can you read that question out for us again, David?
Yeah, sure. What is the minimum sight distance required for a passing lane on a highway? The posted speed is 100 kilometres per hour. The operating speed is 110 kilometres per hour. And this is on a road that has Type 1 road trains. So essentially, it has to accommodate for passing Type 1 road trains. And I should point out here, it says passing lane, that's an overtaking lane. So it's a designated overtaking lane.
All right, thank you for clarifying that. And I'll just leave that poll open for a few more moments for the remainder of our audience to get involved. We've only had 32% response, so I hope we can get a few more responses before we close that off and share the results. David, is there a answer here that you suspect will be the most popular one?
Well,
or hopefully the right one.
What I would say is that we need to consider the operating speed versus the posted speed. So we need to recognise that vehicles, that 85% of vehicles are travelling at the operating speed. So we need to accommodate for that speed. I've just popped up the table there on the slide, so hopefully that should assist people. Just to go back over the previous slide, we're predominantly looking at the continuation sight distance here. There's no need to go into the opposing lane to undertake the overtaking manoeuvre. So we're looking at Type 1 road train in an overtaking lane with continuation sight distance.
Alrighty, well I've closed that poll off now, so thank you for those of you who got involved, and I'll share those results. So David, I'm not quite sure if you can see that on your screen, but I'll read them out to you. So we had answer A had 23%, answer B had 24%, and answer C had 53%. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that it's answer B.
It's answer B. Why do you think our answer C might have been such a popular choice?
I think because it wasn't taken into consideration that it's an overtaking lane. So if we don't need to pass into an opposing lane, you don't need a greater length of sight distance to determine whether it's safe to come out and pass the vehicle, because if there's no overtaking lane, you need to use the opposing lane. So you need a longer distance to establish, firstly, whether you can come out and pass the vehicle, get past the vehicle, and then safely complete the overtaking manoeuvre, which is, of course, what the 1,200 metres would be for. If there's an overtaking lane, you can just pull out and overtake.
Well, that is a good tip, David. I'm sure we've all learnt something very new today.
Yeah, there's other considerations that go into it. 660 may not be the ultimate answer. If you want to provide a longer length, perhaps mitigate some risk, provide a bit of contingency, you can by all means go above and beyond that. You can account for establishment sight distance. You can do all these sorts of things. The point of the exercise is just to outline when you're designing the road, you need to provide overtaking opportunities to pass the vehicles that are on that road. Also, too, you need to pass overtaking opportunities every 5 kilometres, ideally, at a maximum every 10 kilometres. This will reduce platooning, so vehicles queuing up behind a slower moving vehicle, and it reduces the likelihood of motorists passing a vehicle, perhaps at an unsafe opportunity, and it resulting in a crash, head-on crash, or a run-off road crash. So these things need to be considered during the design process. Providing overtaking opportunities is one of the harder things to provide in rural road design because there's so many restrictions with horizontal and vertical curvature just due to the nature of the existing terrain. Okay. So speaking of which, next tab off the rank is horizontal alignment. Okay, so we'll start with a poll question. Does a curve increase the likelihood of a crash occurring?
Alrighty, well, we might try something a little bit different this time. So instead of typing your answer into the questions box, we might get everyone who would like to answer yes to raise their hand. So that's just that little hand icon next to your name. You can pop your hand up. We'll be able to see those. All right, thank you Andrew, Amy, Adrian, lots of A's, Jim, John, Kanch, Kazi, Kirk have all answered yes. Are they on the right track, David?
They certainly are, Angela. A curve does increase the likelihood of a crash occurring. However, the likelihood varies depending on the curve type, the radius of the curve, and what mitigation measures such as signage and delineation have been put in place. Some things that do increase curve crash risk is inconsistent curve radii on a length of road, compound curves, so that's a curve which starts at a radius of, say, 200 metre radius, and then at the termination of that curve it decreases to, say, 180 metre radius. So the steering path needs to be tightened, the vehicle will have to brake and tighten up the steering path as well. A poorly designed reverse curve, so this is where a curve goes from left to right. It may have rotations that are too far, and it also too may have compound curves within it. One thing to recognise is that a curve radius does result in speed reductions. Vehicles will have to reduce speed to negotiate those curves. There's a table there which gives the desirable max and the absolute maximum of the speed from the operating speed to a safe speed to negotiate that curve. For the top one, we've got an example, the desirable maximum of speed reduction of 10 kilometres and the absolute maximum of 15 kilometres. It's quite simple. The more you have to reduce speed to negotiate a curve, the more chance there is of something going wrong. Okay, so we've got the curve types here. Some curve types, not all of the curve types. We'll just have a look at these three. We've got a single curve, compound curve, and a reverse curve. Okay, the blue lines are the riding paths of motorcycles. So we have to recognise that different road users have different needs. Motorcycles will use the full width of the lane through the curve. You can see on the single curve it goes from the left over to the centre line, and then as it exits the curve, it goes back onto the left-hand shoulder. For the compound curve, you can see the tightening of the riding path, and then on the reverse curve, to go out to the edge, come back in, near the centre line. This is a smaller radius curve up the top, so they'll have to brake, reduce the speed, tighten the riding path, and then continue on. The closer, every time a motorcyclist has to brake and change a riding path, particularly whilst leant over in a curve, the likelihood of a crash occurring increases. The more a motorcyclist has to do this whilst also near the centre line, increases the likelihood of a head-on crash. There's a hypothetical buffer along the centre line which is called the head-on zone. This is also applicable to passenger vehicles, more so for motorcyclists. So we have the vertical and horizontal alignment. The vertical alignment affects driver comfort and the sight distance, and in particular, stopping sight distance. This slide shows a combination of vertical and horizontal alignment. This combination is known as a curve over crest. In this situation, you can see that the stopping sight distance required by the red car moving along from left to right. There's the horizontal sight distance there. Horizontal sight distance is fine, assuming there's no cutting or vegetation on that left-hand shoulder. However, the stopping sight distance over the crest is halved. Whoops, go back. So the combination of poor stopping sight distance over the crest and the fact that the road changes alignment with the left-hand curve is quite a hazardous situation. The red car, without being able to see over that crest, really has no idea what the direction the alignment goes in. You're heavily dependent on mitigation measures such as signage and delineation. Okay, so I mentioned mitigating the risk. Some measures are providing sight distance. You may need to put tight radius curves in the alignment. That's okay. You need to provide for that. So providing sight distance, providing curve quality, which is signage and delineation, lane width, and providing a sealed shoulder. Sealed shoulders on the outside of curves, really important. They allow for an errant vehicle. As we stated at the start of the webinar, we're looking at safe systems. So we're recognising that people as road users, motorist drivers, make mistakes. We had a look at the 3 different curve types. So when we're considering motorcyclists, for the braking, redirection of the riding path may result in an error or a misjudgment. If a motorcyclist goes on the outside of the curve and there's a sealed shoulder, they can brake, straighten up, come back onto the road. And when we say wider lanes, it's not lane widening. So within the guide, there's provisions there for lane widening to account for the inside of heavy vehicles with the rear trailer tracking. This is widening the lane. When we widen the lane, you can also put in things like wide center lines, which separate vehicles in opposing directions from the head-on zone. And then an important thing is to make sure that the wearing course is well drained. So that's a combination of your super elevation and your rotation rate, and also too, what aggregate are you using? Are you using asphalt? Asphalt's all surface draining. If you've got a large 14 mil or 16 mil aggregate chip seal, that's going to drain a lot better than a dense graded asphalt. Okay, so we've got an example of curve quality here. The example shows the use of additional guideposts. These clearly delineate the direction of the curve and that the curve is of a quite small radius. This is a great example of how the likelihood of a crash on a curve is mitigated. A design decision has been used to go outside of the recommended spacing for guideposts. Okay, these guideposts are spaced around about 2 to 3 times closer than what they would be recommended within the design guides. So speaking of making design decisions and mitigating risk, I'll ask the question, is the designer required to follow the off-road design guidelines or your state design guidelines absolutely to the T?
Good question, David. All right. Well, similarly to before, if you could raise your hand if your answer there is yes, or leave it down if your answer is no. We'll have a look at what comes through at our end. I guess, yeah, it's difficult. We don't have a lot of people raising their hand to say they agree with that statement. So, I'd say, though the Austroads guides and obviously the state design guidelines are there to show people best practice, I guess you need to look at the individual circumstances, don't you?
Yeah, definitely, Angela. The principles within the design guidelines are based on years of research. The numbers all add up, and they all have a role to play within guiding people through the road design process. However, these are guidelines. They're not Australian standards, but they are considered as these standards in inverted commas. It is advisable to follow the guidelines closely. However, the designer should exercise their own judgment and make a design decision when they do deviate from the guidelines. This will cover them from a risk perspective, and it also, too, going through the design decision process, it shows the benefits or perhaps even disbenefits from deviating from the guidelines. An example of this might be to save money on reducing crest heights. We looked at the vertical sight distance before, we looked at the curve over crest. If a vehicle does not have the stopping sight distance and can't see over the vertical crest, perhaps it's too expensive to shave the top of that off, or perhaps you have an alignment with continual vertical crests with those problems. So in an effort to upgrade or build a longer road, perhaps we make a design decision not to provide stopping sight distance over all those crests and we provide manoeuvring spot distance, which is by providing wider lanes. We put other mitigation measures in, such as signage and additional delineation. So how are we going with those hand pop-ups? We're not seeing many?
Look, we've actually had a lot of people answer no, and have attached some comments to those, such as one from Casey here, who's saying it depends on the person who is signing off on the design. Some people are stuck in their routine and won't sign off on anything that deviates from the standards. So thank you for your comment, Casey. Fabian is saying engineering judgment is also required for particular site constraints, which I think is a great answer. Philip here is saying guides need to be followed, but should have a process for variance, and therefore following allows a variance. So yeah, many of the answers are no, and have some great comments attached. So thank you everyone for getting involved.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I was fishing for, and look, like I mentioned, the design decision process is definitely one way where you can document it, and perhaps as a designer, prove your case to whoever the designated person is that's signing off on the design. Definitely positive there. So,
David, sorry, before you go on, do you mind if we just cover off a couple of questions that have come through before you move on? I know we've got a lot to cover, but we also have been inundated with questions, so lots of people getting involved, which is great. So just quickly, a question here from Elaine. Elaine's question was from earlier on. She's asking, do you consider wire rope barriers a risk for motorcyclists?
Look, don't quote me on this, but when you consider roadside safety barriers, you need to consider many things. So there's the collision speed, which is governed by the operating speed, and also too, is there a sealed shoulder to perhaps reduce your speed before impact? The angle of impact, how flexible is the object being hit, and also to the surface area of that impact, of the impact zone. So if you consider the surface area, so if you're coming in at a shallow angle, so almost parallel to a concrete safety barrier, you hit it and then you slide along it. So we've got shallow surface angle, large surface area. If you come in at the same angle and hit a signpost, this is an errant motorcyclist, so not a car, so this is the human body. Come in at the same shallow angle and hit a signpost. It doesn't matter what angle you come from, when you're hitting a small surface area, the severity is going to be high. A signpost is made to be frangible for a vehicle, not made to be frangible for a motorcyclist. Same thing with wire rope poles. Wire rope poles are designed to be frangible for vehicles. However, they're not designed to be frangible for motorcyclists. However, they are frangible. I'd much rather hit a wire rope pole as opposed to a signpost. The statistics show, and there's an upcoming Austra's report which will be published in November, and the statistics show that there are more fatalities for motorcyclists when hitting W-beam steel guardrails because the posts are not flexible. So that's my, in a roundabout, non-conclusive answer.
Well, we thank you for your non-conclusive roundabout answer. And we might just take one more before we move on. A question here from Max. Max is asking, what is the current trend in design for cyclist/vehicle separation?
Yes. Well, there's actually been a few. This is sort of something that's picking up in the media. So I also know that Brisbane City Council is looking at on-road but separated cycle paths. There's some things being done in the CBD in Sydney where they're providing separated cyclist paths. So they're just using temporary curbing to provide cycling lanes on the road, but they're separated by the yellow plastic curbing. But it's definitely something that's being highlighted more and more. There are also too challenges with one thing you need to consider with cyclists is cyclists are just as vulnerable as pedestrians. So you need to consider, is the road appropriate to have cyclists on to begin with? You look at things like shoulder width, operating speed, number of vehicles, and you just need to take all those things in balance. It's definitely, the trend is on and up. They're being catered for, and as more knowledge and awareness comes out about mitigating the risks and what the risks are, I think this is something that will be considered more in a day-to-day design process, which is a really positive thing.
Great, thank you, David. All right, well, we have actually been inundated with a lot of really, really good detailed questions, which I know that we unfortunately will not be able to cover today. But David, if you're up for it, we could always schedule a follow-up webinar, a bit of a Q&A session to get through some of these detailed questions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We're giving David more work to do. I'm sure he's very pleased about that. But for all of our audience, if you feel like your question is really, really important and you want it answered sooner rather than later, again, our contact details will be up on the last slide at the end of the presentation, and we do welcome you to touch base with us at any stage. So, David, I'll let you get back to your presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, and thanks everyone for the questions. As Angela said, unfortunately, we can't fit them all in, but we would like to address them. So something that I keep mentioning in the webinar is making design decisions, weighing up the pros and cons. Okay, so some things to consider. Consider the speed, the AADT, the formation width, and the roadside hazards. Consider the cost to provide mid-level design options, as opposed to providing a higher level design option, which in turn mitigates the crash risk or a maintenance cost or something like that. So if we're talking about managing the risk, if we're aware of what the crash types are, we can manage those. We can during the design process, we can look at the cost of the design and maintenance, and what the possible reduction in fatal or serious injury crashes are. That gives us our cost basis. And then from that, we can determine how much is the risk reduced by. So by going above and beyond, perhaps spending a little bit more, maybe even you don't have to spend more, but by doing things differently and slightly deviating from the guidelines, what are the benefits, what's the cost, what risks are we mitigating? Okay. So extended design domain is already prevalent. It's already within the guidelines. It already gives designers the opportunity to make design decisions. However, we can also use out-of-the-box solutions and document how and why these decisions are being made. Don't limit your design to the guidelines is something that I'm trying to get through here. Okay, so we've got an example of a design decision. We've got high-speed rural road, 100 kilometres per hour, undivided. Okay, so we need to consider what the crash risks are on this curve. We've got a risk of a run-off road or a head-on crash on the curve. Consider the cost-benefit of providing wider lanes on the curve. Also, too, we need to consider what costs might be for a land resumption if we're not in a rural area, additional earthworks, or perhaps we might be able to provide a larger radius curve, and also, too, perhaps the lane widening. Right, once we have the wider lanes in, we can more easily put in a wide centreline treatment. So we can see the image on the left, high-speed rural curve. We've got wide sealed shoulders, a wide centreline treatment, really good delineation, and a guardrail. The image on the right, same operating speed, same number of vehicles, unsealed shoulders, no wide centreline, really poor curve quality with the chevron alignment markers there. So these are the sorts of things that we're looking at. Okay, we've got another design decision, and this is one that's featured in the extended design domain. We've got your classic crest. The stopping sight distance over the crest is restricted. So the high cost solution, reduce the curve radius on the crest, increase the stopping sight distance. That may not be feasible, or as I mentioned, you may have an alignment which has a large number of vertical crests. So we'll widen the lanes. Widen the lanes over the crest, provide manoeuvring sight distance. This gives the motorist opportunity to manoeuvre around an object, or perhaps move over to the left if there's a vehicle encroaching into their lane. Okay. So consider the frequency of a restrictive road element on the alignment. So this may not necessarily always be a vertical crest, maybe another feature such as a hidden side road or something like that. Need to consider, does a hazard need special attention drawn to it? If we have frequent crests, we can perhaps get away with the standard warning signage. If you have a reasonably good alignment with no restricted sight distance over crest, perhaps we might need a vehicle-activated solution where the sign will illuminate and flash at the vehicle just to really draw attention to the fact that there's a hazard there on the alignment. Also, too, you can see in the diagram, I've got the guideposts at much closer spacings. This does a couple of things. It delineates and highlights to the driver that something has changed. It'll draw their attention as they drive along. It also, too, reduces the speed environment. So a motorist may inherently just reduce their speed, and that in turn reduces the required stopping sight distances if a vehicle is travelling slower. Now, in saying this, you don't want to light it up like a Christmas tree. If you put too much in there, it'll distract the driver, and that's the complete opposite of what we're trying to achieve. Okay. So when we design to manage the crash risk, the likelihood of an individual motorist crashing is independent of the AADT. However, the values of various design elements are selected based on the AADT, which is, of course, the AADT is the number of vehicles on the road each day. So the guidelines give you specifications. Okay, we've got 1,200 vehicles a day. Let's have a 2.8 wide metre lane. We've got greater than that, let's go to a 3.5. We need to consider that, but also to consider the other elements of the design, what that crash risk is, and what that crash risk is to each individual motorist. One thing to keep in mind is if your crash risk is high and you assess it, you do a safety assessment, you think that over, let's say, for example, a 20-year period on that road, there's going to be a fatality. Each fatality in Queensland, for example, costs the government $8 million. So that's actually a really good figure to work with when you're looking at design decisions and increasing costs. If you can demonstrate to reduce the number of crashes and the cost to do so is less than $8 million, you're in pretty good stead. So what influences crash risk? Well, we've got a crash type here. So we've got single vehicle run-off road crash. The designer should be aware of the possible crash types and what design elements affect the likelihood of a crash occurring. For a single vehicle run-off road crash, the likelihood is affected by the lane width, the radius of the curve, the quality of the curve, which is the signage, delineation, line marking, raised reflected pavement markers. If you have rumble strips, that mitigates the risk even more. The road condition, so that comes back to pavement life, maintenance costs. What's the likelihood of that section of road having a pothole or some shoving or something that's going to affect the performance of the vehicle? The grade and the skid resistance. Okay, predominantly the skid resistance in the wet. When we're looking at the severity of this crash type, we need to consider what are the roadside hazards, how far are they from the edge line, and also do we have a paved shoulder width? As I mentioned before, if you have a wide sealed shoulder, motorists can possibly reduce their speed before the collision point, which reduces the severity of the crash. Okay, so we've got some examples here of some existing roads. Obviously, these were designed at one point. They were designed to be like this. When we look at OSRAP, we assess a road from 1 star being the worst to 5 stars, which is being the best. Some of the features on there, you can see the features which increase the crash risk are in red. Features which are good in green, and the features which are, kind of making a bit of a difference that could be improved on are in yellow. Okay, so that example there has a sharp curve. That's the rear of the image there. So that's taken into consideration, the sharp curvature. Take note of that. In the next slide, we have a similar road. It's also 1 star, but it's on a straight. The reason it's also 1 star, it's still undivided, still got high speed. The roadside hazards are within 1 to 5 metres of the edge of the shoulder. The delineation is poor. There's no sealed shoulder, narrow medium lane width, and the skid resistance is poor. All right. And when you look at that image and you say, oh, okay, yeah, the skid resistance is poor. Well, that may not have been that way when it was designed, but there may be reasons why, when you're going to think about your asset management programming and maintenance and things like that, what's the likelihood of that pavement being maintained? What's the likelihood of that seal being resealed before it gets to the point where it deteriorates and increases crash risk? That may mitigate what sort of seal that you use in the design. Okay. And then here we have a 5-star example. It's on a freeway, but that doesn't mean that the same attributes can't be adopted local roads or connector roads or subarterial roads. Okay, we've got a high speed, but all the mitigation measures are there. So we've got a divided carriageway. There's no intersection of property access, so that helps it a lot. So there's no crossing vehicle movements across the road. We're on a straight. We've got wide lanes. The roadside safety barriers are there. Now, each roadside safety barrier has a different level of risk. Roadside safety barrier does not reduce the risk, it substitutes it. Each barrier has a different risk weighting. We've got the wide paved shoulder, adequate delineation, and a good road surface condition. Okay, so we've got some examples of the cross-section where perhaps things could have been done differently, and we can demonstrate here how some forethought in the design process manages crash risk and also to maintenance. So in this section we've got a culvert. We've got a waterway that goes underneath the road. We have to provide a culvert. So on the left-hand side, we might have a narrow formation width. That may be an existing constraint. That may be something in the design that's already there so that we can build a longer road. But we can see perhaps we can widen the culvert and the formation just at that section because we're introducing a hazard. Those box culverts have a fairly high crash severity rating for motorists, heavy vehicles, and motorcyclists. So what can we do? Perhaps we can widen the shoulder, seal it. That reduces the spatter slope. You may end up with a recoverable slope. All these sorts of things. Just a little bit of forethought and just not running with a consistent cross-section and putting in some mitigation measures for when we're introducing hazards on the side of the road. So we've got an example here in the Northern Territory. That's actually a 3.5 metre wide lane. They just have really large vehicles. So there's two road trains there. They're just about to go across the culvert. And this is the culvert that's in question. So when we look at the cross-section, there's a floodway drainage treatment that's been put there. That's what the culvert spoon drain is. So that needs to remain there. However, it's introduced hazard. So there's a narrow shoulder, there's no verge. So once the left-hand tyres of the vehicle go over that verge, very hard for them to recover and come back onto the field shoulder or the lane. It's a non-recoverable slope. It's about a 1-on-2 batter slope. And then, of course, the nature of the drain, once an errant vehicle's in that drain, it directs the vehicle straight into the culvert drop. So this is the culvert. That's a colleague of mine up from DOT in the Northern Territory. He's 6'2", so it's a decent drop. The severity would be quite high for any road user that was directed into that culvert drop. So one thing that we should also recognise is that floodway treatment is a treatment that's in the off-road guide. Everything as it was in those images, is as per the guide. So when we're managing safety risks, we need to consider other variables. So a solution that we proposed to them was provide a safety barrier on the approach to the culvert that will redirect vehicles. Of course, to provide the safety barrier, we need to fix the batter slope. So we provide a recoverable batter slope. That in turn changes things for every action. There's an equal or opposite reaction. So we put in rock protection mattresses to prevent the scouring. So this is a feasible solution, and this is going to be used. Another one too would, of course, be when you're in the design process, have wider shoulders, have wider culverts. However, in this situation, it was a retrofit. We had to design something to fit an existing alignment. Having a look at the horizontal alignment, this is an alignment with a timber bridge. The design objective was to replace the timber bridge with a concrete bridge. The AADT is low, 2,500 vehicles per day, and the operating speed is 80 kilometres, which is the same as the posted speed. The operating speed doesn't always have to be the same as the posted speed. It's just dependent on the road environment and the geometry and how motorists feel when they drive. In this case, it's the same. So this is an aerial image of the alignment. Down to the bottom in the centre, this is the existing timber bridge. We've got a large radius curve here with an operating speed of around 80 to 90 kilometres per hour. So the design objective is to replace the timber bridge with a concrete bridge. The design solution that was proposed was to introduce the concrete bridge on the inside of the curve. This in turn introduced two reverse curves, one on either side of the bridge, which resulted in fast rates of rotation, braking, changes of direction in steering. It really just increased the number of safety risks. The curves were of a small radius. That's another thing we spoke about. Curve crash risk. The transition length was short due to the confined nature of the alignment. And originally the design did not incorporate super elevation. They used adverse crossfall because it was just impossible to put the rotations in there for the super to go from one side to the other. So we've ended up with a pretty poor design solution. So what ended up happening was back to the drawing board, made some design decisions. So maybe perhaps, Angela, I'm conscious we've got about 5 minutes to go, we're nearly there, but maybe if a few people wanted to put in one or two design solutions before I give it away.
Sure. We'll take a few comments from our audience today. So if anyone does have anything to add, please pop those in. And once again, we do apologise for going over time. There is certainly a lot of information to cover when we're talking about the fundamentals of basic geometric road design. And just a friendly reminder to everyone who's joined us today, we are recording today's session, so if you do need to leave us, we understand our feelings won't be hurt. You can always catch up on the recording and the presentation material once we get that out to you this afternoon. So thank you. No? Sorry,
David.
Mic's on.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Angela, and thank you. It's Kathy here. Just wanted to jump in, David, while people are suggesting some alternatives and solutions here. We had some earlier commentary and questions, and I just wanted to bring some of those up now so that people know that we haven't left them hanging. Earlier when you talked about curves, and there was a couple of comments there from, we had some comments there from Stephen and from Shane in regards to introducing curves on long straight roads in an effort to help combat fatigue. So that was a comment there earlier. Oliver has also, Oliver's also made some, I guess, out-of-the-box considerations regarding design, which was things such as curbside parking as well as wildlife migration, so as not to impact wildlife's life cycle. And if you can take a quick moment just to answer, we had a couple of questions in there about what is the difference between the established site distance and the continuation site distance. If you can give us an answer on that one in 25 words or less.
Yeah, so in short, the established site distance is the distance where you're behind the vehicle, you're poking your nose out to see if there's a continual, safe length of road without a vehicle coming in the opposite direction for you to undertake the overtaking manoeuvre. The continuation side distance is once you're beside that vehicle, do you still have enough distance and enough time to complete the manoeuvre, or do you have to put on the brakes and pull back in behind the vehicle again if there's a vehicle coming in the other direction?
Okay, terrific. That makes sense to me. So hopefully it's good for everyone. Okay, so we'll just cover off some of the... Yes, and I do apologise for all the people that have had to go. We hope to catch you up on the recording, but it looks like we might have to schedule a more detailed session, David. Some of the comments that have come through is, let's have a look here. So we've got realign the road to the bottom of the page as opposed to the top of the page. Put the new bridge in the same location as the existing bridge. Widen the culvert. Make it a one-way giveaway crossing. Reduce the speed limit, says Anthony. Rebuild in the current alignment, says Paul. Limit the offset of the new bridge, says Mark. Cut across the rice paddies, says Matthew. There's another one. Thank you, Matthew. Straightening the... Where are we? Oh, sorry, I have to leave. Yes. Put in a sidetrack and locate the new bridge on the same alignment. So there you go, David.
Yeah, and there's definitely some good suggestions there. When we're considering the design process and we're assessing what the costs are, as I mentioned, we also need to consider what the safety risks are. For this design, we've identified that we're introducing safety risks with those curves. Definitely continuing the large radius curve to the bottom of the page and putting the new bridge on the bottom of the page and coming around, you're not introducing the two small radius reserve curves. That's definitely one solution. You would assess the costs of doing that and then what the implications are with safety risk and maintenance and all those sorts of things. However, the ultimate design solution, when considering the crash risk that would have been introduced with those two reverse curves, is exactly what someone suggested. It's build a sidetrack, put in a temporary crossing, and replace the existing bridge on the existing alignment. One thing to also consider there is the road had no pre-existing crash history, so everything was operating as it should, so there's really no need to change it and introduce new hazards. So, yeah, so there we go, the sidetrack and the temporary crossing. So that's really it for the webinar from me. I hope everyone got a lot out of it. It sounds like across the industry, everyone's on the same page as far as considering road users and wildlife, cyclists, and also to making some out-of-the-box decisions. I'll hand it over to the girls.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time, not just to deliver today's session, but of course a fair bit of effort went into putting it all together, and we really value your time. We've probably got about 100 questions here that unfortunately we're obviously not going to be able to cover off today, but it certainly highlights that there's a lot of interest in this topic, and if that's in fact true and our listeners agree with that statement, if you could kindly indicate that in the feedback survey that will pop up on your screen once the webinar has concluded, that would be much appreciated. We'd love to hear from you if you are interested in learning more, or even just to tell us how we went today. We'd appreciate that also. Thank you, Kathy, for joining me in the studio, and we hope you can join us for future webinar sessions proudly brought to you by ARB Group. Thank you.